will be following the published and posted agenda. This evening will be broadcast live by Chelmsford Telemedia and recorded for future viewing. We do not, however, have the ability of Zoom this evening due to technical difficulties. First on our agenda this evening is approval of minutes from January 9th, 2025. Has everyone had an opportunity to review them?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved to approve the minutes of January 9th, 2025.
Second. All right. Any comments or questions? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
That's 6 in favor. All right. Moving right along, we have a presentation, review, and discussion of the town manager's proposed fiscal year 2026 recommended operating budget. And with us this evening, presenting this for however many times he's done it already, is our town manager, Paul Cohen.
Good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. It's been 2 months since we gathered at the school administrative offices for the tri-board budgetary meeting, and I guess, as we all know, the situation sort of has gotten worse since then, in terms of the fiscal challenges for the town. The governor's budget came out, was a little underwhelming in terms of local aid. 2.2% is the increase in unrestricted general government aid to the community, because that's the growth in the state budget technically, although her spending plan increases by over 7% because of the fact that she's factoring in the fair share tax, or millionaire's tax, however you want to refer to it as, into her spending plan, including also funding a portion of Chapter 70 for the first time. So anyway, the budget came out as required in the fourth Wednesday of January. The next day, the local aid numbers came out. We obviously utilize those, as we always do, because that's our best indication, not only in terms of the proposed Chapter 70 education funding and unrestricted general government aid, but more importantly, it also gives us insight into the cost of our assessments for charter school tuitions and so forth for the upcoming year, and what we may receive in veteran veteran exemption reimbursements and so forth. So we took that. Around that same time, the end of January, the information was coming out in terms of our health insurance premiums. We knew back at the tri-board meeting in January that it would be a double-digit increase in health insurance. We were expecting 10 to 12%. When we then learned at the municipal conference in Boston that the range of increases, the average was 14.8%. The range was from 9.8% to 19.98%. And then we learned last week from our broker that our actual increase is going to be 17.77%, which is slightly above the 17.5 that we sort of left there expecting. And the reason for that is because every community is rated individually, and even though we're on the benchmark plan, which means that's the lowest amount you can get to, which mirrors the state's group insurance commission plan, the fact is your premiums are rated on your claims experience, and right now we're running at 100% of claims to premiums, which is really a deficit because you have to have administrative and overhead and other costs into your premium base to fully fund. And basically the plan itself, much like the state's group insurance commission plan, is running at a deficit this year. So the reason for the extraordinary rate increase is they have to make up the loss for the current year and then project the premiums starting on July 1 through next June 30th, which is still, as we know, a few months out from the commencement point. And the other sad part is the benchmark plan from the state hasn't been adjusted in terms of deductibles or such in a decade. And in fact, there's a story about that today in terms of what's happening to the connector plans. And in that story, if you look to the very bottom of the story that I read, they said, the state's group insurance commission plan, which provides the insurance for state employees and such, as well as participating cities and towns, is also suffering a loss, and they're having double-digit increases. And again, they haven't adjusted the co-payments, deductibles in a decade. So it sort of boxes you in, because if you bid it, you're going to hit what the market is, and then you can't go below the floor because, where we pay 75% of the premiums for active employees, the employees pay 25% share, so they're not obviously wanting to pay the 25% share of the higher premium as well as take on higher deductibles. That's not going to happen. And then the other disappointing news, which we knew months ago, as we know, when we talked about the tri-board, was the Middlesex County Retirement Assessment, which is going up by 8.4%, which is a $13 million payment to the town, of which basically $11 million of that is for the unfunded pension liability that's scheduled to be paid off in the next decade. And as we know, next year's increase will be 6.5%. So when you factor in the health insurance premium and the retirement assessment, 69% of our net new available additional revenue is utilized before you even pay anybody anything for the upcoming year. And obviously, we have to pay people because of the competitive labor market. And we are in the process of negotiating contracts. So the end result is what you see there on the slide. I ended up recommending funding the Chelmsford Public Schools at an increase of 2.4%, or $1.77 million to $75.65 million. John and I sat with the superintendent, arrived at that number. He presented his budget, I guess, 9 days or so ago now, and they're going to have the school committee have its budget hearing the Tuesday after school vacation week, roughly 2 weeks from now. And if you recall, his increase was basically double that. He was looking for $3.5 million for level service. And as I saw at the presentation, you'll see in their budget packet, which I sent to you, is, he's obviously made some adjustments, some of which we discussed in December, such as paying for the cafeteria program director out of their revolving fund. They've applied their school choice monies. They've applied, circuit breaker and so forth. And again, the superintendent will go through the details at their hearing and when they come in and visit you. And then the other piece was Neshoba Tech. Neshoba Tech was a bit of good news this year. The increase is only 0.3%, or $13,000, to just over $4 million, $4.05 million. And the reason for that is because although the district's enrollment increased slightly, our enrollment as a member community declined, and you pay based on your membership enrollment and your required minimum contribution by the communities. And that worked out because both Neshoba's enrollment October 1st and the Chelmsford Public Schools enrollment at September 1st declined. So there wasn't as big of a transparent shift between the two as if that works in an opposite direction. If you have an increase in one and a decrease in another that's material, then your minimum contribution follows the students. This year they both declined. And as we discussed at the Neshoba breakfast that morning, Neshoba can't do anything more because they're $1 above their net school spending requirement in their budget, and so they're at the floor. So that was good news on the Neshoba, which again got offset by the bad news on the health insurance and retirement. And then we ended up coming in with a 1.7%, or $222,000 increase to the general government departments, which, as we've discussed at the tri-board meeting, is about half the size of the school department as a operating department outside of benefits and so forth. So obviously our increase is 1.7, theirs was 2.4. It's less. We did eliminate positions. You'll see that in a later slide. And also we have debt service increasing because we have to do the responsible thing for our infrastructure. We maintain level funding in our capital plan at $6 million, which again, if you're running a $168 million budget, is not an overburdensome amount of capital in terms of funding. So the sensible thing there is not to cut capital spending. That'll just put the town in a hole going forward, and that's not fair to the community. It's irresponsible for those who come after us. And so there's the list you can see of the positions that were funded in the current fiscal year budget but not funded in the next year's budget. Fortunately, a number of those were vacant because, as we know, and as you know, a year ago I presented a report to you as to the select board and shared it with others about we could see this tsunami coming at us. And so, like when our retirement human resources director retired, we didn't fill the business development director when that person wisely slid over, because had she not, she probably would have been let go 2 weeks ago. in all honesty. So some of the positions were vacant. The highway division labor, for example, was another one that was vacant, so we didn't have to terminate. But unfortunately, we did have to lay off 3 people in real time when the budget was released. And I want to emphasize again, and I know you'll hear from some of the departments, I know one in particular, regarding the departure of an employee. It's not that those employees didn't perform a valuable service, and not that they're not needed for the budget. It's just that we have to do the responsible thing going forward in terms of maintaining our fiscal integrity in the realities of the financial situation that our residents, businesses, and others are confronting. Because this isn't a correction, this is a trend. And if you saw the news yesterday about inflation, you can clearly indicates that inflation is a trend that's being very hard to wrestle. And so, although, my question on these, and in light of everything, it was just a question of if, not when. We are at critical staffing levels in the municipal government side, and some might say even slightly below that, and I'm sure you'll hear from those whose budgets lost staffing. They'll say that that's going to be painful and it's not acceptable. It's just a judgment call. And if you remember when we had the discussion and when I sat with the department heads, I said I could pass out everybody a blank sheet and I'm sure we'd have 30 different budget plans. I'm just doing the one that I think is the most responsible. And again, I'm more concerned looking ahead. And that's why you see that in some of the funding decisions as well as some of the warrant articles on how to prepare for what's ahead. So, that's sort of how we did it. And basically, where there were people where there was no prospect for future employment to the town, we let them go immediately. If there were some that were either working in some capacity in the future, such as a senior work program employee or an election and so forth, where there was viable employment going forward, we held on to those people. And then the other thing of those decisions is I sat down with the department heads and said, how can you help with this situation? What can you do? In a number of instances, the choices that were made about the ability to perhaps get grants to backfill those positions. And that's what happened in the health department and in the police department, is we believe we'll be able to backfill those positions in part or in whole by grant funding opportunities, as best we know at this point in time, with the uncertainty that the state is having, and certainly with the federal government, which funds many of the state programs. And again, other things that were omitted, which were valid requests, were also there. And again, the other cuts are losses, and I've heard from people about the loss of the Sunday library hours and the lifeguards at the beach, and it just became, we looked at everything. We literally built the budget, John and I built the budget from ground zero, in terms of what we have to do. And as we've discussed, and I'll try to be succinct, but, no matter what, we've got to assess all properties. We've got to issue bills. We've got to account and issue warrants. We've got to issue payroll and maintain vital records and so forth. And that's really how we went through the budget going forward. And again, valid requests for additional staffing that you've heard in various forms just couldn't be honored, and likely will not be honored in the foreseeable future. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, the benefits and insurance eats up $4 million, or almost 69% of the available revenue. Again, of that $4 million, $2 million is for the 17.5, and now really 17.7% increase in health insurance premiums. And the reason I put numbers out is people then get the context. Oh, you're insuring 685, active employees and their families, yes. And again, the town pays 75% of the premium, which is now over $35,000. So the real cost of that is now approaching $26,500 for the town share. And then we also provide Medicare supplement plans for 1,000 eligible employees. And that number has been steadily growing over time. And we see that in the charts that are in here as well. And that's a mid-year plan. So we're now trying to forecast the known number for the 6 months of the year, but 6 months into the fiscal year, or almost a year from now, we don't know what the new premiums will be, because those are on the calendar year, not the fiscal year. And the town funds 60% of those premiums. And I mentioned about Middlesex County being another $1 million to 13.1, of which 11 million of that is for the unfunded liability. And that's what shows you the cost of passing things on and not being responsible by prior generations. And that, we're suffering. Imagine what we could do with $11 million in the budget in terms of offsetting and providing enhancement of services, because that's what's missed in all this. The service demands since the pandemic, particularly in the education area and in the public safety area for mental health issues, is phenomenal. In terms of the demand that's come on these people. And we see it. We see the reading scores and the math scores are down from even pre-pandemic levels, which is unsettling. But we know the police and fire on mental health calls are just staggering, and the difficulty the state's even having, you're hearing with the state budget about trying to have an ability to provide adequate mental health services in the state budget. So we can see that, the property taxes is our essential funding source, over 76% of our budget. That's governed by a 2.5% regulator that doesn't have any impact on inflation. So therefore, when inflation is running at 3%, or a few years ago at worse than that, significantly worse than that, that's what puts us in the predicament that we're in. And so that's the story, is the driving cost of inflation, particularly in the area of benefits of health and retirement assessments, and the limitations of Proposition 2.5, where even those, we can't ask for an override, practically, and in those communities, they're not even asking anymore. Westford failed a year ago. They didn't even bother to ask this year. And communities that did pass them slightly, like Acton a year ago, aren't even asking for them. They're cutting this year because they realize the difficulties that residents are having, and just whether it's the grocery store, the utility bills. And again, news is coming out again today about people's gas bills and the staggering increase that the state adopted in the distribution charge, not the supply charge, but the distribution charge for, which provides those for the utility providers as well as the Mass Save and other programs. Again, as we talked about the tri-board, we pushed local receipts to realistic numbers. So far, that's holding solid. The state had a good revenue month in January. They're optimistic that they're not going to make cuts in the state budget this year. And then our available funds are what just sort of comes out, what supplements that. Again, the disappointing part on Chapter 70 funding, even though it's historically the highest amount of Chapter 70 funding in the state's history, which every year is, quite frankly, unless they level fund it, the $75 per student is less than the $104 per student that we ultimately ended up with a year ago. And we're hopeful that the legislature will increase the governor's numbers. And in the discussions that the finance director and I had with the superintendent of the schools was that even if that were to occur, your number is your number. We're sort of putting ourselves out there in terms of the budget-wise, because we have unsettled bargaining contracts without a funding source, and you have your contracts funded in your budget allocation in your budget because you don't come back to the town for that. So whatever the Chapter 70 ends up being, or whatever the new growth ends up being, that will just sort of go towards that fund, as you see later on described here. But $75 per student, as you can see in that funding chart, doesn't put us to where we've been. It's just a real problem. 2.62% sounds good, but we know the cost for educating children is higher than that because of the demand, particularly for specialized services. And that's why I give the historic, just to give you a sense of, and the sad part is even if it went to last year's number, you're probably talking an extra 200,000 at best if it went that high. Not that we wouldn't welcome it, but it's not going to solve the town's financial challenges. The capital improvement plan John's going to speak to after I finish from the podium this evening, but as I mentioned earlier, it's level funded at roughly at $5.9 million, and it's responsible. And again, it goes to things that you can't put off and avoid, such as the biggest one, which is the McCarthy School roof, and obviously in real practical ones like security at the entries to our school facilities, and boilers, and so HVAC and roads and so forth. Enterprise funds, the beauty of the enterprise funds is that not only they stand alone in the self-funding and the self-accounting, is they're not constrained by Proposition 2.5. They're basically a fee for a service. So the sewer enterprise fund increases by 5.63%, but that's really driven by the assessment to the wastewater treatment facility of $200,000 to $2.4 million. And so remember, that's paying for not only the treatment over there, but remember, our wastewater flow goes through the city of Lowell's pipes that gets to their plant. And as you know, the city's doing some upgrades there, so we know there'll be double-digit increases that for the foreseeable future, given the consent order that the city is under for its wastewater plant, because the federal government doesn't like the disposal of raw sewage into the Merrimack River. And I don't think even with the new administration that they'll waive that requirement. And so that's a real cost. Same thing, stormwater enterprise, again, under the federal regulations and state regulations, that increases by 6.5% to address the proper drainage and infiltration and testing of, which is part of the groundwater supply in the district. PEG access is funded by cable revenues, so that's basically holding because they're declining. I think it's being held by the fact that they're declining the loss of cable subscribers, but the cost of program is going up. Even those who are doing streaming are realizing that, they can't hold those artificial low prices anymore that they got people to cut the cord for. Now they've got to turn that around. So I think the hemorrhaging is kind of stopped from the cable people because they kind of quickly realize that the streaming, has its own financial challenges, and how many of those streaming services do you want, and do you get the volume of channel choice that you'd have, as well as the convenience. Anyway, so that's okay. And then the Forum and the golf course just run along at level funded amounts. The ice rink, as you know, we made a significant investment a few years back between the ice surface, the electrification, and so forth, and so that's now has no foreseeable significant challenges under the management company going forward. So basically that $65,000 goes and builds our reserves over the year, or something that arrives unforeseen. And then same thing with the golf course at $30,000. So that's sort of the concluding part is we're in this challenge, and the select board on Monday night made a request for the legislature to support the governor's filing once again of Municipal Empowerment Act, to provide some relief at the local level, even if it isn't with the local option taxes, which the legislative leadership seems pretty cool on. As we know, last year they deep sixed it, and they don't seem to have moved much this year. But we're saying provide some assistance in some manner or form, particularly in those that don't involve local option revenues. So we'll see if that occurs. So that's sort of that in a nutshell. I can quickly go through some of the other slides, for those watching, and I know you've had this presentation material and heard of it sometimes. Again, our priorities tend to be education, public safety, capital, and public health. The line item changes, again, to show you where the money is allocated across, and you can see, when they're small budgets, numbers move real quick. But basically, you can see the bulk of the money goes to benefits and insurance, the 3.97 of the 5.725, 1.77 to the schools, and public safety, 436,000. And you see some negative numbers because of the cuts of positions in health department, notably in community services, and then municipal administration as well. And our debt service declines in the aggregate, but most of that is really driven by the decline of excluded debt, which doesn't provide us any relief within the levy. And you can see the key asterisk there being it does include the funding for the unresolved collective bargaining agreements for public safety and library employees. As we'll talk about later this evening, there is a possibility that a couple of those agreements could come in time for town meeting. I know that deadline, we can't bring it in on the doorstep of town meeting, so hopefully by the end of next month, at the latest, we'll have something in place, and I've made that aware to the bargaining groups. Again, $5.6 million, you can see the bulk of the money comes from the property tax. And then I provide data on 5-year comparisons just to show people, where does all the money go over extended periods of time? And again, The money goes to three critical areas: schools, which is the Chelmsford Public Schools, in terms of aggregate amounts, but percentage-wise, it isn't disproportionate. Public safety, DPW, benefits and insurance. You can see the benefits and insurance is disproportionate, over 41% in 5 years. And you can see our debt service is declining over that period. And then I do the 10-year, which again shows similar results. Excuse me, and the municipal facilities jumps out more there. That's just because of the continued aging structure of our buildings. We haven't built a school in over 50 years. Since '74 was when the last school building opened. And that's where our square footage is primarily, and so forth. So again, the schools, as I mentioned, they're getting a 2.4% increase, or 75.65, which again is below the $3.5 million request that they had. And again, there are issues, and you'll see in his budget, is wages, transportation, spending, tuitions increases, so forth. I then provide you with the funding levels, as you can see historically through that, and so in recent years they've been around 4.5%, and so this 2.4 is a departure. You can see that this shows where they are compared to net school spending requirements. We're over 30% above net school spending, and you can see the growth in net school spending requirement is over $3 million. And now, thank goodness we're not at net school spending, because we wouldn't be able to do it. And that's what you're hearing some of the communities say to the governor and the legislature. They can't meet net school spending because they don't have the revenue if they wanted to meet net school spending, because how the formula works from the state under the formula that was adopted back in '92. And there's one more year left of this school funding formula 6-year plan, and already the Senate president is talking about, well, we've got to look at this formula and start developing a new plan. The formula built in the 90s, as we know in Chelmsford real well, was really tilted towards those who had enrollment growth. And so here's the case here where we have a decline in enrollment growth, but yet our net school spending goes up by $3 million. So that's again, unsettling. And then this data is available, again, puts into perspective, because people say, gee, my tax bill is almost $9,000 on an average single-family home. Well, yeah, but the latest data we have back 2 fiscal years ago is that the per pupil expenditure for a student at the Chelmsford Public Schools, a K through 12 district, was almost $18,000, and therefore we can feel comfortable today that it's over $18,000 as we sit here and stand here today. And again, I try to put it into somebody's mind. Well, what does that mean? It means if you're looking at a classroom, it's probably $400,000 sitting in a traditional classroom of 22 students, and it costs about $2,200 a day to educate under total cost, which includes not only their budget but the benefits, the debt service, and everything that goes to that. And this provides the enrollment. As you can see, the enrollment declined as of October 1st from 5130 down to 5068. So it's roughly where it was 10 years ago. You look at it that way. There were 5,056 students on October 1st, for FY15. So that would have been October 1st, 2014. And then on October 1st, 2024, there were 5,068. Clearly, you can see the number of teachers has grown since that 10-year period, and the student-teacher ratio has improved in that 10-year period. And you can see class size in recent years has gone up, and it's about where it was 10 years ago, at 18.9. And again, that's just an average. Particularly
teachers, is that like any
licensed professional teachers?
Licensed professional,
Yep.
okay.
And again, here's the budget drivers that account for the funding increase in the school department. We saw this back in December at the 3.5, the request, and again, they have a 1.75 shortfall from what they requested back in December. In Neshoba Tech, at the time this was prepared and released, the estimate was 4,050. It ended up being 4,053,630, or 0.41% increase, or just over $13,000. And you can see, as I mentioned earlier, our enrollment decreased by 8 students to 2010, which basically means we're sending about 50 kids per grade level between grades 9 through 12. Obviously the district member enrollment increased by 7, and therefore our percentage went down from 28.8 to 27.49, and that's why our assessment only went up slightly by 0.41%. And you can see our enrollment has pretty much stayed steady now. If you look going back to 21, we're in the low 2s, again, they had lost enrollment when they did the construction project back over a decade ago, and they've also moved out the choice students that they had brought in during that period because they had the capacity. And now I think they said there'd be 1 choice student in the school for the upcoming year. So, and they're really even with their addition, they're constrained for space, but the demand for technical education is growing. And you can see the most recent data we have for that is that 2 years ago, because they take it from the end of year reports, was that it was almost 22,459 for vocational tech per pupil expenditure. And that's because the cost of educating just a high school is greater than an elementary school, and certainly a technical high school is greater. And so really, it's not out of line to figure that they're probably spending over $23,500 per student. Again, Neshoba Tech has the same budget drivers because they're funding everything as a town. Contractual increases, special ed, building maintenance and capital, vendor and other fixed costs. Again, real quickly, police, same staffing levels that we've had for 2 decades. It's below where we should be. Their calls, have been steady in that 36,700 range, you can see, for recent years. The most popular being their property checks. So you can see they've just been steadily at 69 officers. Same thing in fire, 63.5. 4 platoons, minimum of 13, the minimum of 11, and that's been the model now for, again, decades. Although we see, the calls are sort of in that 6,400 range. Again, over 2/3 of the calls are medical. So in last year, calendar year, 4,330 of those 6,369 calls were medical related. Again, for employee compensation without contracts, it's just over $100,000. Again, the next slide basically is the Blue Cross in insurance. Again, the actual number is 17.77. We haven't received the actual, what they call the rate shell, which actually gives us to the final dollar, but the email we got this week was they were finalizing that, but it's 17.77. And John produces this chart that shows you the growth of subscribers in health insurance. And so again, we're insuring 679 at this point. If you went back 10 years, we were insuring 610. And the same thing, 10 years ago, we had 857 retirees we were providing insurance for. Now it's 992. And again, part of that's due to longevity in terms of mortality schedules and such. And also, it's just reflective. If others in the private sector can diminish their plans, then there is more of a trend for somebody to take a municipal plan. So again, it's the employees' cost in this is going to increase because if they're paying 25%, so they're going to have like a $1,300 increase in their premium. The town's assessment to Middlesex, again, $11 million of this assessment of $13.1 million is to amortize the $116 million unfunded pension liability. And you see on the next slide the history of that. And you can just see that fourth column, the payment on unfunded liability, how it just explodes out there. And again, it's going to increase by a minimum of 6.5% for at least the next half dozen or so years, assuming their rate of return and everything else comes in through the market. We'll see. But it's just, that this is legally required to pay it. Same, solid waste and recycling, again, those are vendor services, so those contracts inflate by inflation. So we've got to pay $115,000 for additional for collection and disposal. And then Medicare tax is based on your payroll, so we have to fund, we're now funding 1.3 million, or an additional 5%, or 62,000 Medicare tax. Debt service, as of now, as we've known over time, because we haven't had a major school project and we've had limited municipal projects, our debt service is very low, and it's basically going to be paid off in the next 10 years. However, what's really embedded in the numbers is our excluded debt is declining now to almost a denominal number. We're falling from 1.11 million to 0.27 million, or a 75% decrease. However, it doesn't provide any relief to the operating budget because the debt is put on there only, and you can see this chart, you can see how it's declined. We were at, if you go back 5 years, we were at 3.6 million, we're now at 273,000. That's the remnants of the sewer project, the DPW debt exclusion. This obviously doesn't include the recently approved debt exclusion for the fire station projects, the $25 million project. That won't hit probably for another year because we're really just doing design and we don't intend to start construction until probably spring of next spring. So that's why you're not seeing that here yet. And obviously a school project, you'd have, same thing, you'd have short-term borrowing and bans, and you really wouldn't see that debt exclusion if it's approved till really the 2030 decade because you wouldn't be paying that off. You'd be under short-term construction, borrowing, and bans. But what is significant is our non-excluded debt service. And you can see if you go back, we were at 7.5 million. We're now at 7.8. It increased significantly, and that's basically the fact that two things were happening. One is we're responsibly funding our capital and have accelerated that with the real cost of capital. So we're now at 6 million out of 168 million. And then there are those outside things such as the school kitchens at the high school and the roof project and so forth that we're not part of the capital, but in terms of the capital improvement plan, but we're part of the capital, and those coming into our amortization schedule. The next chart is the full-time equivalent employees. And again, why I put this on in a 20-year history is in 20 years, we've added 8.6 employees, or less than 3.5%, on the general government department side. In the last 5 years, that's just over 4. Based on the numbers of the school budget that came out, their number for the proposed budget is 803.6. So that TBA is now 803.6, which is a decline of 4.2 from the number in their current fiscal year budget. And that's an increase of 108.6 employees, or 15.63% over 20 years, or 16.8 or 2.14 over the last 5 years. And then I provide this on the general government side for two reasons. One, to show you the detail of the level staffing, essentially. Again, the right column is the proposed, the middle column is the current, and then the left column is 20 years ago. And when I say core staffing levels, that's what I'm getting at. Despite the growth of the population of the town, as well as some of the demands on services, such as what goes on now in the clerk's office with vote by mail and all these other requirements, staffing has pretty much been static. And this is what alarms me going forward is even in the depths of the recession of 2008, the Great Recession, and the economic downturn in just over a dozen or so years ago, we just realized we can't operate less than that. And so what worries me going forward is where do we go? And you can see I provide a lot of detail about DPW because if not, it gets obscured because, for example, 20 years ago, we didn't have a facilities department. At the time, there was the pilot program where the town and the schools would have a merged facilities operation. So if you just put the DPW number out there, it kind of distorts it. And then it actually underplays the school side because they had the facilities people. So that's why I put this detail so you can see 20 years ago, we didn't have any facilities. Now we're at 17.5. Sewer enterprise and stormwater enterprise, again, they're not part of the tax levy or the operating budget. We obviously didn't have a stormwater division 20 years ago. We didn't have one 10 years ago. But we have 11 employees that are funded from the surcharge. And again, as the sewer ramped up and finished its final phases 20 years ago, we've been pretty much static at 13 since then. So again, I think it just provides some insights. You can see even the libraries are operating at lower staffing than they did 20 years ago. Police and fire pretty much constant. And then when you even look at a number like, well, gee, you have a lot more inspectors. Well, no, one of these inspectors, the increase of one for the current proposed year is the fact that we've taken on the regional sale of weights and measures that was provided by the regional planning agency, the Middlesex County Governments. We're now the lead host community for a 3-town program. And so therefore the body goes to our body count as a town, even though we'll be reimbursed for 2/3 of that cost. So again, that's helpful. You can see our budget drivers, our health insurance, schools, it just sort of beats it through. Again, the allowable 2.5% increase is just over $3 million. We're projecting $2 million of new growth. That won't obviously be known till the end of the summer or early fall because it's a reval year. And we bumped it up to $2 million because it's a reval year, and also because we know that the first phase of the West Campus at 225 Princeton Street, first units should be occupied this spring. So we basically are figuring, that will affect our growth, rightfully so, because new growth goes through June 30th. So again, we're looking at 6.45. On the revenue side, you can see, again, the idea of how much we're reliant on the property tax. And even over a 5-year period, you can just see, again, that doesn't change. It actually increases slightly. And you can just see how, our general government aid is really tied to the growth in the state budget. So over 5 years, it's 18.5%. And we did get that bump in Chapter 70 funding a couple of years ago. And same thing over 10 years. You can see that over a 10-year period, if you compound it 2.5% over 10 years, you can see how the general government aid is just lax in terms of real value, and then even the Chapter 70 starts waning. But you can see, again, the reliance on the property tax even over a 10-year period. So again, the new growth in the tax levy is $5.1 million from the 2.5%, $3 million the base, $0.1 million the base increase, $2 million in new growth. The slides that I always put over here shows where your average single-family property tax bill is allocated. So 45% of that without the benefits and other supportive costs, just the school department budget, not the support like benefits and debt service, is over $4,000. And then obviously benefits insurance, our second leader at 20% of our budget, and so forth. Public safety, as you'd expect, will come after that. And the other thing to note is the shift in valuation of the property tax. So we're now at 85% comes from the residential property valuation and only 15% from commercial, which again is a negative trend. And there's no sign that that's going to change. Like I said, it's kind of leveling off, but it's certainly, a challenge because of the struggling commercial market.
And that's the actual number. That does not include the tax shift.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. And then the average single-family property tax bill, again, if you were just to compound 2.5% over 5 years, you'd be at 13.14. 5 years, we're actually at 19.8 because of the shift to single-family and to residential. And I guess the good news is, or relative good news, is if you rank us, and the state does account for this and rank us, 1 being the highest single-family tax bill in the state, in the town of Weston, down to 351. We're now down to 84, whereas last year we were 79. If you went back to 2007, we were 61. So yeah, taxes are going up in Chelmsford, but they're going up everywhere, and there's no escape it. That doesn't make you feel any better, but it just, and that's why we put the comparison to other towns to show you that the increases in Chelmsford aren't out of line with what's happening in our neighboring towns in recent years. State aid, again, the big part of the state aid, 2/3 of it is Chapter 70 education funding, just over $15 million, and then 28%, or just over $6.38 million, is general government aid. Local receipts, we're estimating $13.1 million, an increase, again, over the current budget. That, it's interesting to see what's in there. Obviously, motor vehicle is a big component of that at 6.15 million of the 13.1, and then permits being 1.7 million is significant. We don't see anything big out on the horizon. The last big project was the West Campus project, and so that's why the 1.7 seems realistic. Again, if you look at historic levels, even in the first week, we haven't seen an influx of ADU permits, so I thought that might be a rush through the door. Not that that was going to be a significant amount, but the bottom line is there's just no indicator. And if you look at the issues, and whether you're in Boston or otherwise, the market, because of the high interest rates, is sluggish. Available funds, again, this is all the benefits and everything that come from the revolving funds that get flowed back to the budget. So it's, and then the last one, I always put the slide in, is about inflation. And again, it's not the 7% in calendar year 22, but it was 3.1 through November. And again, it's still over 3.1 because the January numbers just came in. And that's the problem. You can't have 20% inflation in 5 years and you're at 2.5% and expect to hang on. And in fact, it was postponed because we had that 1 year of the extraordinary Chapter 70 adjustment. So I'll stop there before, I know John's behind me on the capital. If you have any questions at this point in time, or if not, I'll return later after John to review the warrant articles.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you.
And thank you. Obviously, next on our agenda, we have the presentation, review, and discussion of the fiscal year 26 recommended capital plan. With us is John Souza, our finance director.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Finance Committee members. So I'd just like to provide you with a brief overview of our fiscal year 26 capital plan. And I believe after the...
It's right after.
Yes, right after. There we go, right after. So you may recall from the tri-board meeting back in December that the Capital Planning Committee voted to recommend 19 projects totaling just over $5.96 million. This slide shows the breakout by functional area, and we looked at that back at the meeting. The next slide actually shows a financing summary of the plan. You see that we have a relatively small amount of recaptured funds, which are funds that are remaining from prior year projects that have been completed, and the small balances are no longer needed. So when you take those all in aggregate, it's just over $27,000. So the net amount to be borrowed would be about $5.94 million. And then what I'd like to do, we'll just start, the first area that I'd like to begin with is community services. So the first project involves the senior center, and this is phase 2 of the replacement of the flooring tile at the senior center at a cost of $170,000. And as you see on the slide, this tile is over 30 years old. It goes back to when the senior center was renovated back in the 80s. And then we can move on to the public libraries. We actually have 3 projects in this area. So the first involves the rehabilitation of the parking lot here at the Adams Library, which is over 20 years old. Many of us still think as the library is relatively new, but in reality, the parking lot has a lot of challenges. You see the cracks in the photo, the curbing, the concrete curbing has a lot of damage to it. One of the things I wanted to point out is our Public Works Director brought to our attention at the Capital Planning Committee meeting is we were able to achieve a $50,000 reduction in the total price of if we did 2 parking lot projects together, just because of, you have less mobilization costs, you have economies of scale. So This project here, at a cost of $365,000, it would have been $25,000 more if it was done solely. And we'll also look in a future slide at a police department project. So that was a significant savings. The next project involves the computer replacement of computers for both staff and patrons at the Adams and McKay libraries. That's at a cost of $60,000. The library has a 4 to 5 year cycle for the replacement of their computers. And then the next project involves, this is phase 2 of the HVAC system replacement at Adams at a cost of $450,000. And as our DPW director explained, there will be a phase 3. At this point, the cost of phase 3 is unknown, but this is critical to keep this going. So because the system is at the end of its useful life. Next, we'll move into the public safety area. This project involves the rehab of the rear parking lot at the police station, which you can see goes back to 2004. The cost of this project is $405,000, and as I mentioned earlier, this would have been $25,000 more if it was not being done in conjunction with the library lot. Then we move on to the fire department. This involves the replacement of a staff vehicle that's used by the officer in charge whenever there's an emergency going on. This is just under $112,000. The vehicle carries quite a bit of heavy-duty equipment, and it replaces a 2016 vehicle. And then from there, we move on to Public Works. And as you know from prior years, we always try to maintain our infrastructure in the sidewalk improvement area, the roadway improvement area. So we have $375,000 dedicated to sidewalk improvements, $425,000 dedicated to road improvements, and these will be based on priorities assigned from the pavement management database maintained by DPW, as well as the sidewalk assessment and master plan. Next project involves the replacement of a 2013 mini excavator. You can see it's used by the Highway Division for a number of project uses. The cost of that is $130,000. And then the next piece of specialized equipment is a sidewalk snow removal unit. You can see it's replacing an older 2003 unit. The cost for this is $210,000. It was explained at the meetings that the new unit will be able to have different attachments added, so it will not be used just for during winter season. And then from there we move on to municipal facilities. The next 2 projects involve the replacement of trucks, and I just wanted to take a moment to explain one of the things that we heard at the capital planning meetings were that, as we've been talking about for several years, Public Works is having a difficult time trying to attract private contractors during the snow removal season. So one of the ways they've had to cope with this is to try to use more Public Works and facilities staff to assist with the plowing. So that's the reason that you see this truck here, an older 2010 Chevy Colorado, which is a lighter duty truck, will be replaced with a heavier duty 3/4 ton pickup that we equipped for snow plowing. So that's why the cost is $85,000. The next project replaces a light duty 2008 Ranger that's not able to be used for snow plowing. You can see it's a higher mileage vehicle. That will also be replaced with a 3/4 ton pickup equipped for snow plowing. The next project following that involves $150,000 for Americans with Disabilities Act accessibility improvements at the town's public parks, playgrounds, open spaces, and the actual projects will be based on the recommendations that come from the town's open space and recreation master plan. Next project involves actually right here in this building. This is going to be a multi-year project. This involves $180,000 to begin the renovation of 2 of 6 restrooms. This is basically phase 1. If you've ever used the facilities in this building, you know that since this is a very old building, they're sorely in need of repair or some upgrades, and so this will begin that effort. Then we transition to school facilities. So just to highlight some of these projects. So this first project involves building secure entryways, which you may recall from the last year's project. This was first piloted at McCarthy Middle School. And so the whole idea is to provide secure access, be able to construct a containment area so that if someone was to come in, they could be kept in a certain area till the screening was done. And you can see that the reason for the cost of just over $877,000 is this involves doing this at 4 elementary schools, Byam, Center, Harrington, and South Row, as well as the Parker Middle School. And also this includes the renovation of a stairwell at Chelmsford High School to allow for better emergency egress. So all of that is combined in this project. The next project involves the partial roof replacement of a section at Center School that you can see is 25 years old. That's a cost of $130,000. And then there's a project at South Row School for $60,000. This involves replacing the water heater and mixing valve at that school. You can see the current unit's 12 years old, and the goal is to try to replace it so that we can avoid an unplanned or catastrophic failure. Then we go to McCarthy Middle School. You may recall in this year's capital plan, fiscal year 25, the design work has been funded. This is the first phase of the actual roof replacement work. And you can see that this is a roof that's 23 years old. And this shows the amount of square foot area that will be done under this plan.
John,
Yes.
so that's a lot of money for 36,000 square feet. And then compared to the center school, which is 130,000 for 8,000 square feet, is the McCarthy, it's an older building, obviously. Is it more expensive because of how it's built versus the center?
Yeah, it's an older building, and you have the center school roof is it's a section of it has asphalt shingles, and this is more of a different design. This has a flat roof, and I believe and you also have it's a special rubber type of roof, I believe, and you also have to. Solar panels have to be removed and then reset, so that adds a little bit to the cost as well. And I will say this project, because McCarthy is such a large school, this project will also, the next phase will need to be funded in the FY27 capital plan.
Thanks.
So that's the reason for that. And then also at McCarthy Middle School, $700,000 is budgeted for the replacement of 4 boilers that you can see there that are 18 years old and approaching the end of their useful life. And that is the final project. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to address those. And then just I'm sure you know this, that first slide just said, the next step in this process is this will be brought before town meeting for town meeting consideration, and then assuming town meeting approves, then we would then move in the summer months to borrow the funds to complete these projects.
So I just have a question on, because I'm really thinking about the town and the issues that we're facing year over year in terms of just getting additional resources. So how do we get assets that provide some payback versus more of a consumption asset? And what I mean by that is that if you, for example, with solar, you get a return on that, a financial return that reduces your energy costs every year. So how much could we invest to reduce that energy cost to free up more cash flow every year?
We have been pretty aggressive over, I'd say, the past 10 years or so, adding solar capacity wherever we can. We have extensive amount at the McCarthy Middle School. We have a smaller amount at the senior center. Basically, whatever, wherever we're allowed to, wherever the facility will, support it. I think we looked at the forum, but it did not have the structural. That building was constructed in the 1960s, and the structure of the building would not support that. So.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, how much are we spending on electricity? And if we got creative, because you don't have to put solar on a roof. You can. There's many different places that you can put it. You know,
Yeah,
how
we're
much
actually-
could we save in the operating budget every year?
Yeah, actually, we did a large energy-saving ESCO project, I want to say roughly, Paul, 10 years ago or so, or slightly more. And we receive solar payments for solar renewable energy credits. There's a facility in the town of Bolton, and we receive revenue from that whole arrangement. That ESCO project also allowed us, for example, to replace all the streetlights at that time with energy-saving streetlights and make a bunch of HVAC improvements in many of the school buildings. So standing here right now off the cuff, I couldn't give you an exact answer, but we have been pretty aggressive at trying to add solar and other energy-saving features in, wherever we can to.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I think you
Yeah.
know the town's done a great job in that. I'm just trying to think like how much more can we squeeze out of these things that will be productive assets versus consumption assets. In terms of for example, if you delayed the parking lots for a year and then you took that money, reinvested into solar, you generate cash flow starting next year. That whole income stream will be into for probably the next 20 years or so, right? And so it'll be some payback period, but it's productive asset.
Yeah, it's a little, what I've seen with the solar project is it's usually complicated. Usually, you're not going to get an immediate payback, but we also have fixed costs for electricity, so it may take a while for that. But we also have to your point's well taken. We have to also balance that with. We have, some physical facilities like parking lots and that where the library's well used, and I will say they've been very patient, and this project's been delayed for a while. And we also have to look at, safety costs. For example, when Adams Library was constructed with value engineering, the concrete curbs were substituted for granite. Well, fast forward 20 plus years, many of those curbs are crumbling. It's kind of a safety hazard, so we don't want someone to trip and fall on that, and then, you can guess what comes after that. So it's all kind of a balancing act, I guess, is the way I would.
I didn't want to talk about it tonight, but we're on it.
You're going to anyway.
Now that I'm on the committee, so first of all, I approve that. Okay, so what you're about to hear is comments that are regretting some of what I did. Okay, from this point of view, I think, given the financial condition of the town, it's difficult to justify in my mind, two libraries to spend. We're going to spend almost $1 million between the air conditioning project, not only this year, but subsequently, I think there's more to come.
Yeah.
I know we saved $50,000 on the parking lot, but that's because we're redoing the parking lot. How often, is the building open every day?
Well, we're doing the
won't be now.
parking lot at Adams, but
I mean, it won't be now. We're taking out the Sunday. I think what we have to keep in mind here is that capital has to be addressed. We can't just simply not address it. And so the amount that's been increased hasn't been significant over the last decade, 2 decades. And there's a plan that goes out 10 plus years on what needs to be addressed. And a lot of stuff keeps getting pushed a year ahead because you can't address it. The other thing to keep in mind is this is a borrowing. So it's a borrowing every year, and we're paying the debt service on it, not the full value of it. So I'd rather buy projects that need to get done that have been pushed off with today's dollars than worry about it in tomorrow's dollars.
Well, I appreciate that. I might have used capital a few times in my career and understand that a little bit, okay? But we're sitting on a situation where we have 2 libraries, not 1. And most towns only have 1, okay? And we're in a very difficult time where we're laying people off. They're losing their job, and you look at this, and at the very least, you'd say, why wouldn't you defer this? And maybe there's other projects. If you look down the road, there's a whole bunch of projects, and you really got to weigh not just what's there 2026, but you got to look beyond. And I think it's going to be a very difficult time for the town to invest in all these infrastructure issues. So, while I understand if you delay, that's an argument, and I understand the argument. But I also understand that you gotta make some difficult choices. And 2 libraries versus 1 library is, in my mind, is a difficult choice.
Especially for the limited hours, right? So I was out with my son trying to go to the library, ended up in North Chelmsford, and pulled up, and it's closed, right? And so then to me, it's like, do you have the fixed asset? You also need the operating costs. The whole reason why it's valuable is because of the operating costs, because it's open, right, to serve the public, right? So it's the same thing. If I look at a parking lot, we're keeping the library open. I'd much rather keep the library open on a Sunday than pay for the parking lot, because that's the whole point of the library. It's a community
Mr.
place to bring people together. I understand we're commingling OpEx and CapEx here, but
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the parking lot is at Adams Library in Chelmsford Center,
Yes.
that project, and the HVAC system is at Adams Library in Chelmsford Center. So the only thing I think in the plan is a computer replacement. I will say very few of the computers, because it's a small building, are for McKay in North Chelmsford. But I just wanted to highlight that in the slide because we often receive questions of what's being from town meeting members on that.
I think the comment still stands, though, right?
I
So
have-
if you were to take the OpEx from one library and refund the Sunday hours on the other one, at least you'd have a library open on every Sunday.
I have the discussion every year with the library director. The McKay Library it's a glorified house. That's what it is. So the operating costs of closing that building are not going to be material, because basically she reassigned staff from the center library, full-time staff, over to McKay for those few days a week that they're open. And so, as it's been explained to me, and I'm sure Leslie and the library directors will come in, because they're the ones who control that budget, not me. They'll come in and say that there's no appreciable savings of closing McKay, and they can't sell the asset because of the trust. So the problem they're going to have is, you can close McKay, and it good optics, but it's not going to materially impact the library's operating budget, because those employees who move over to McKay those few days are going to come back, and you're still going to have to heat the building in the wintertime so it doesn't freeze, or you're going to totally decommission the building. It gets discussed periodically, but it's not going to materially address. And I know all nickels and pennies add up to dollars, but I'll defer that to the library trustees and the library director when they come here. But believe me, we've looked at everything, and if it were a major functioning asset, we would look to decommission it. It just doesn't, doesn't materially affect anything in terms of though I think, I don't see, as I showed you, you got the same library staffing that you had 20 years ago, and so I don't think you can come in here and say, okay, we'll close in McKay, we're going to wipe out 3 employees. It's not going to happen. In terms of, for them, the ability to function. Just like we used to talk years ago about, why don't they fine people when their books are late? I mean, we've had those discussions. It just doesn't get anywhere. And maybe the problem is we've traversed this road, over 18 plus years, and we have the scars and experienced, having visited those issues. And the bigger problem with capital going forward is the cost of capital. I was on a call earlier this week with the MSBA, because we're doing the accelerated repair program for the South Row School roof. And we talked to the owner's project manager we just brought on board, and they're like, your budget's going to be tight because the cost of roofing is approaching $40 a square foot. And we thought we were being conservative by carrying about $34 a square foot, because when you went back for a few years ago, it was in the high 20s. And then when you look at the price of fire apparatus, what's not on here this year, but what's lined up, in front of us, a fire apparatus, and a fire truck, because is now approaching $1 million. Not to mention a ladder truck at 1.8 plus, and that's because, quite frankly, the same thing that happened in the school bus industry happened, and look it up, in the fire apparatus. Holding companies consolidated the fire apparatus industry And now there are fewer manufacturers and less competition, just like when the same thing had happened in Massachusetts with the school bus contracts. When they now go out and bid for school bus transportation, they get one bidder. And then that bidder, which is in our case, our bidder is now held by a holding company out of Chelsea. And, somehow the antitrust things aren't being analyzed closely enough, then that's beyond our scope at the local level. So the bottom line is the cost of capital continues to grow. Just try to do an addition on your house. And that's what John was saying about the bathrooms in this building. We're going to do 2 of 6. I think originally we were hoping to do 2 to 4, but the costs are just ridiculous. And
how many years have we put those off?
yeah, we put those off for years, and I'm not sure when we'll get it done. And we were originally trying to scale it with the elevator project for this building because you want to shut it down at the same time. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do it. It is, this is how I relate it to the residents, is that doing the same thing. It's going to be interesting to see this ADU thing, because I think people thought this was like adding a bedroom to the house. Well, wait till they find out what it's going to cost to construct an ADU in today's market, just like it is to put a significant addition on your property or to buy a car or something else. The inflationary aspects are staggering, and not to mention the time leads for this equipment. And so when we're talking the roof projects, we're talking summer of '26, not summer of '25 numbers. And we want to bid that work, next fall or next winter to get a good bidding market, because you're just not going to get it in today's climate. Sad but true. So anyway, I want you to know that we do look at everything, and I'm sure you'll ask these questions of the departments and boards when they come in, such as the library trustees. Believe me, I'm sure their first priority is to keep the library open on Sundays throughout the months of the year that they've had in recent years. And they're having 2 struggles. One is the cost, and 2 is the employees don't want to work Sundays. And that's the other part. And that's why you see us with these vehicles. Why are we replacing the smaller pickup truck with a bigger one? Because we can't get the contractors or the vendors who want a snowplow.
And the snow's back.
Yeah, the snow's back.
back this
The snow's
year,
back, and it's more the ice is back. That's what's
Well,
killing
that's
us.
the- yeah.
The salt. And what happened with the salt, right? Because you had 2 years, the price gone ridiculous, and they had 2 years, so now nobody wants to hold dead inventory. So therefore, when it snows in February, you can't find it at the hardware store, because none of the hardware stores want to hold on to dead inventory because they got burnt the last 2 years of mild winters. It's not that, it's just a tough situation.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you. You might as well stay up.
Yeah, see up here. Let me go through I provided you the printout you have in front of you, and I'll go through the slides for those watching and those in the room, because I think sometimes the visual helps in terms of where we are with the warrant. The warrant is scheduled to be signed by the select board a week from Monday, on the 24th. So here's the presentation as of tonight, on the 13th of February. First article is always hear reports of officers and committees. So there'll be a financial overview there, perhaps an update on the strategic plan. If there's anything you can think of, or anybody watching it that they'd like to hear a report on, let us know. But we'll present it. Next item will be the consent agenda. At this point, without talking to the moderator, there's probably 13 of the 34 articles could be consent agenda. That's generally pretty much a static list over the years, so we won't spend any time on that. Article 2 is the adjustments, the amendments to the current fiscal budget. That really won't come clear into focus till the end of next month, as we near town meeting and the deadline. And we'll come in before you recess to tell you our forecast, to get through the final payrolls and how we came through the winter and so forth. Article 3 is Neshoba Tech. As I mentioned, the number is $4,035,630, and the superintendent will be providing her detailed presentation. I provided you by email the budget presentation handout. You have that. The schools are $75,650,000. Again, Dr. Lane's budget is out. I forwarded that to you, and again, they'll be going through it on Tuesday, a week from this Tuesday, in detail. The next one is the operating budget, and again, I'll fill in all the line items. Again, collective bargaining agreements, there may be one or two that I'm hoping will be reached in time for Springtown meeting. The next one's reserve fund. I'm level funding that at $400,000 to provide emergency or unforeseen. I think that's going to be tighter than ever as the budgets get tighter. So again, this year, as we've said in the past, we'll get through this year, and we'll get through this year with free cash at the end of the year. But if we're budgeting the reserve fund for the upcoming year, that's going to be a bigger challenge as the budgets get tighter for unforeseen extraordinary expenses. John went through the capital budget, so again, we needn't spend time to review all those slides. So that brings us up to slide 40. We'll get there. Oops, it's the stormwater, sewer enterprise fund. I'm sorry, I called it wrong. Again, as I mentioned earlier in one of the brief slides, it's $5.6 million for sewer enterprise revenues. In the spreadsheets I provided for you, you have the breakdown of that. Again, most of it, as I mentioned earlier, is for the city of Lowell for the wastewater treatment. And the debt increase of $92,000. Next article, Article 10, is Stormwater Management Enterprise Fund, $1.67 million. The budget increase of 4.92% for all of the town's 95 miles of drains and so forth, detention ponds. And then there's a capital one under that for $290,000 for the purchase of a 10-wheel dump truck for the Stormwater Division. Again, the Forum Ice Rink, Article 12, is level funded and a level appropriation at $65,000. Article 13, the cable access, again, 578,000. Again, those details you have in the spreadsheet. Article 14 is the golf course, again, level at $30,000. Article 15 is the annual appropriation of departmental revolving funds. Because the municipal reform hasn't been enacted, we have to vote these every year. Under municipal reform, we only have to vote if the amount changed. Again, it'll be consent agenda. A cemetery improvement fund, David and the cemetery trustees are looking for $50,000 to pave and repair drainage structures at the West Chelmsford Cemetery and to remove some older hazardous trees across the cemeteries. Property valuation services, we're seeking $100,000 from overlay surplus to fund the reval for this current fiscal year. We're in the 5-year reval cycle. Some of you might say, wait a minute, didn't we fund $80,000 a year, last fall? The answer was yes, we did, but we made an error. We neglected to have the assessors declare the overlay surplus. So when they submitted it in, the DOR said, where's the declaration? We're like, well, we don't have it. It's because we don't, I'll take the blame for that. I've been around 35 years. I guess the mistake is it doesn't occur all that often. So again, it's $100,000 for the required property reval in the community. Again, it happens every 5 years. Now on to some more substantive and important ones. Article 18 was brought forth by the Veterans Agent, Regina Jackson. This follows legislation that was enacted this past summer under the HEROES Act, providing new local options for veterans and what we call the Clause 22s, because most of the property tax exemptions are under Chapter 59, Section 5. It's the chapter's so big they went from chapter, section to clause. So anyway, under the clause sections, and what this is basically doing, it's providing a COLA increase for the $400,000 exemption under the veterans provisions of this property tax exemption of state law. If you go to the next slide, you see that we estimate the cost of this is to be less than $5,000 in the upcoming year because it's roughly a 3.1% CPI on the $400. The reason we're doing this is because the $400, if it stays static, then the purchasing power, or more importantly, the value to the recipient diminishes with inflation. So it's the fair thing to do. The legislature recognized it, but of course, the legislature doesn't provide you with any additional reimbursement for the increased exemption.
There you go.
Come on now.
So therefore, so the real heroes are at the local level because we have to make this choice and take this on. And then similarly, under Article 19, under what we call the Clause 17s, for what are exemptions for seniors who are less than 7 years old, minor children with at least one deceased parent and surviving spouses, with estates within certain limits. Basically, it's really only a handful of people who qualify for Clause 17s. So that's been $175. So the estimated cost of a COLA on that is less than $50, but it's something we should do. And again, just to help those people, because it's been $175 since the 1990s. And again, the state doesn't give you any reimbursement for this, but it's something that I think the town in good conscience, and again, we see other towns doing this, is, if you're going to provide exemptions, they at least should have some material value, unlike your Social Security death benefit that stays $255 for forever. So anyway, so that's what we're trying to do there. We are working with the assessors to see what more relief we can do in terms of some of the levels of qualification for that, but mindful that the money that goes to exemptions in what's called the overlay account is the same money that comes from your property 2.5 tax levy. So if we provide relief, we got to be mindful of it's the same dollars that we need for the operating budget. So, if we were to go to extremes and start doing $100,000 of benefits, well, that's $100,000 less you have to fund, the operations, core essential operations of the town. So that's that judgment call, a balancing act, and I think it's appropriate. And we did sit with the Board of Assessors, John and I, and the Veterans Agent, and I think we all agree that the COLA makes sense at this time. And then we'll look further to see if we can address some of the thresholds, qualifications for seniors. Article 20, and this is what I'm talking about going forward. I'm asking for a $50,000 appropriation to basically, as may be needed, to look everywhere and anywhere going forward of how we can better provide municipal operations, look for enhanced revenue sources, what have you. So again, I don't have it earmarked for a particular purpose, but I know sometimes you can't do it on the expertise that you have alone. And so I'm basically looking for this funding because everything's got to be on the table now. And you can see I list some examples of that, whether it's, looking at new revenue sources such as cannabis, which is an advisory ballot question, and then that may take some time either with council or industry experts saying, well, what can the town really receive if it went down that road, to, well, what about regional public safety dispatching? Do we join a consortium like in Tewksbury, where Tewksbury and Drake are, or do we provide a regional dispatch with a smaller community that joins us? That's going to take a little bit of expertise in order to be confident that if you brought it forward to the town meeting or brought it forward for execution, that you knew what you're getting into. Same thing with solid waste and recycling. Where years ago we stopped collecting solid waste and recycling at what we called commercial residential units, basically apartment complexes. We, like Westford and other towns, we got to look at it again. A lot of communities don't pick up at residential dwellings, condo or rental above 4 units. Well, we do. What would that save? What would that provide? We know how it would be received, but we got to understand that, and that's why some communities go towards either a trash fee. We've gone to the 2-barrel limit. The other extreme would be straight pay as you throw per bag. Those are things we got to look at, and it's not just going to be me. We're going to look. The town last did this 20 years ago, where we gathered people together and say, hey, can we look at stuff? And I imagine we'll do that again. And even the water district, I think, is fair to the to the water takers, which is the entire town. That doesn't make sense in the year 2025, and it hasn't been looked at since 1990. For the town to still be operating by 3 independent, separately governed water districts, or would it make more sense to have consolidated administration, consolidated governance? I didn't say town takeover, I said consolidated. So again, look at the whole piece, and that may involve, obviously, an outside party coming in saying, what would the operating cost be? Could all the ratepayers benefit from a consolidated water governance and administration, as opposed to 3 billing systems, 3 superintendents, 3 boards, perhaps better expertise on the various treatment plants that are being built for PFAS, and then really the situation in East. I'm concerned as a professional what's going on in East, because we don't see a plan other than we'll just use Lowell's water if PFAS becomes an issue. We don't know I don't know anything about it. I can't find any information out on looking online and even talking to the Department of Revenue. We said, well, what's their free cash? They're like, well, they haven't submitted the balance sheet in years. And we said, they said, well, isn't that a problem? They said, no, only if they want to go borrow. They need a balance sheet and an audit. So again, I don't know. I'm concerned. It's a small district, obviously. There's infrastructure that they obviously are responsible for. I'm not knocking anybody or anything. It's just that I'm just concerned that there are Chelmsford residents who, through no fault of their own, could be, in a situation that could be deteriorating in terms of their investment in their homes that are served by the water districts and so forth. And so that may be an issue of analysis. Again, we're trying to do the right things by all the residents of Chelmsford. This isn't an attack on anybody or anything. It's just that when we see towns our size and larger that are operated in a holistic manner, doesn't mean the whole system functions at one, but it's a holistic manner in terms of governance, administration, and oversight, and so forth. That might be looked at as well. So again, there are no sacred cows, I guess is the safe way of looking at it. We've even seen school districts, talking about the school busing situation earlier, the town of Framingham is basically going into a program where they're going to lease school buses and provide their own drivers and run their own school bus program. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. I know Concord looked at it. They've kind of gone both ways. I don't know.
Maybe
But
we
when
go
you're
to
in this
Framingham and ask
situation,
them to
everything
log busing
everything
for
should be
us.
on the table. And there is no outrageous or ridiculous question. That's kind of what you were getting at, is where you're looking at everything. So, but sometimes you need a little bit of money to find some answers. So that's what that article is, to provide opportunities. Article 21 is it's submitted by the superintendent of schools with the support of the school committee. This again falls under state law, that in order for them to enter into an agreement with the state agencies to receive federal reimbursement for foster care transportation, they need the town meeting to approve the memorandum of agreement initially for that to take place under the provisions of Chapter 44, Section 70. So they have the memorandum and so forth. They think this will probably get about $12,000. But hey, every 10 or 12,000 helps while leaving it there, assuming the federal government still funds it. That's the other part. So anyway, that's what this article is to authorize the execution of a memorandum of agreement with the state departments of Executive Office of Health and Human Services and Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and Department of Children and Families to report the cost and receive the title for the allowable federal reimbursement to the district. So that's what Article 21 is. Article 22 is an article I submitted, and it has to do with the budget process. And I've been aware of this for some time, but it really never became an issue until the forefront of this year. And I really provide all the language in the article because I want people who read it to see what it is. But basically, the charter contemplates that the manager will receive all departmental proposed budgets prior to the finalization and submittal of the manager's budget. And the paragraph even states that, that the preliminary budget from the school committee will be submitted to the manager for review. But the problem is the deadlines are concurrent. It says that the school department submits those 90 days in advance, and yet the bylaw of the town says the manager submits his budget in 90 days. There's a real problem with the 90 days, I know, for the manager. One is, and I'm trying not to disrupt the process, and this is why I've given you this illustrative schedule. How would this work? That if you brought it the 90 to the manager down to 80, the additional 10 days will make a difference. And let me fast forward to next year to see if this were in effect. And you got to go backwards from town meeting. So town meeting next year will be on April 27th. My budget would be submitted by Thursday, February 5th, which if we were here tonight, it'd be last Thursday. I'd submit it in a select board's packet for Monday, and I'd submit it to you at the same time, like I did this year. The difference is the school department always releases the superintendent's budget the first Tuesday in February. So the problem is when I submitted it in last Thursday and the 10 days before, last Thursday in January, I didn't have the knowledge and the benefit of seeing what the detail of the school budget, and that matters when you're making trade-offs in terms of funding levels, as we were sitting with all the departments of the town of what can we do, where's this, what's that, this is what I can support. As you can see, as that gets tighter, that's more important, and it's only fair. And again, when you were doing level service, level, staffing, yeah, it really didn't matter. But now we're in a different world. The other thing is, the Neshoba budget was always released the last Friday in January, so I'm kind of like quietly going to the superintendent, can you kind of tell me what we might be looking at? And Westford has the same issue. And so we kind of get in, but then I can't release it because it's not fair. I don't want to spoil anybody's breakfast. So therefore, I don't have their budget. So again, they'll submit it the last Friday in January. So again, if that's the last Friday in January, I can have to the first Thursday in February to incorporate it into the budget. It'd be a known number. And then lastly, the most important is the governor's budget. This year, with there being 5 Wednesdays in January, I had the benefit of, before releasing the budget, of knowing the cherry sheets and the governor's proposed budget. Next year, January starts on a Thursday. So the governor's budget's not going to come out to the 28th. Well, that's not going to help me if my budget's, going to come out on the 29th. We're not doing all-nighters. And the sad part is, even though the budget comes out the 28th, they don't release the local aid numbers till the following afternoon. So literally, I'd be submitting my budget slightly before or slightly after the local aid numbers. It just doesn't work.
So this is the timeline that if this town meeting accepted would work for you?
My 10 days, right. Yeah, if you accept, all I'm doing under this thing is modifying the bylaw for the 10 days so that I can be in compliance with the bylaw by an 80-day time frame. And given that this board hasn't met the first Thursday in February, I don't think it disrupts you. So I basically try to take the path of least resistance and least disruption to get this, rather than trying to do a charter change and moving everybody else backwards. So I think that's what I'm proposing here. And I know there's no penalty or sanction if you don't meet the deadlines, but I think it's only fair, and it's only necessary, and it's only what I think is envisioned in the charter, that you have as much information as anyone would want to have to release a budget plan that goes to the town through the finance committee and the select board to town meeting. That you don't want to have chaos saying, well, had I known, or what if, or did you know? That's not. It's just not effective. So that's why I'm proposing amend the town bylaw from 90 days to 80 days, and that's the scenario that I see how it would play out. And I think in real time it works. Right? Yeah, it's going to be a busy last week, and I can assure you we'll have communication like we have going up to this, but you got to see the actual you got to see the actual documents and the actual plans in terms of the local aid charges as well as revenues from the governor's budget, where Neshoba lands, where the school department comes in, and again, I can't dictate how they do their budget. But I can have an opinion and then decide a funding level based upon what I see, as everyone else can. And and I think that's where the dialogue and everything would come in, because I don't want to be disruptive. But especially if we're coming into a period where, if it's very challenging, the decisions are more painful than they've been this year. We need complete information. And again, I will work with everyone, because we start our process early, as you know. And I think our process this year has got to start even earlier in terms of the dialogues, to try to see where we can land. So that's what this article is about, is a polite way, to be frank, about trying to come in and saying, hey, let's adopt the reasonable schedule that's not going to change anything other than the submission of the manager's budget.
Sounds like a no-brainer. What would the objections be?
That the superintendent has to be 10 days earlier. I think that would be the objection.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, he can still stay in the same schedule, but I need to see it. And I need, and I think that's what's contemplated, is I need to be able to see.
Sounds like you should have it.
And not just me, whoever the manager is, because I'm not going to be the manager forever. I mean, I've been doing it for 18 years. I love it. And we've had a series of superintendents, and there was a manager before me. There'll be a manager after me. But in terms of for the town to function effectively, I just think that you need that holistic approach to make an informed decision. It doesn't mean the decision is written in stone, but you got to at least be able to justify. Because I can tell you, this wasn't a pleasant building to be in 10 days, 2 weeks ago, because you're making decisions, and people want to understand the context. And that's only fair. And you don't want to say, oh, never mind. Oh, we didn't realize the governor was going to provide, or we were going to get a hit with this charge from the cherry sheet, or, oh, we were off on the Neshoba thing because of the enrollment shift, or because they needed, to add a cost above the minimum net school spending, and so forth. And I just think that we need that process to take place. It's not fair to the manager to basically then unilaterally, I can't issue an executive order, but he can just unilaterally just say, well, I'm not going to release it, and then what's that going to do? It's not, we don't want to, I just think it's the best way of going about it is let's amend the deadline to 80 days, which I think is doable, and I think we've known by our experience that it is doable.
But you're not affecting the school, like their timing of the budget. They're still doing it on their time. Your time, you got.
Not practically. I mean, if you went literally by the word of the law, it would be, because what the charter says, it's the school committee's preliminary budget, not the superintendent's.
Correct.
But I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to disrupt their world. I mean, I'm just saying, I need the spending plan. And what we've seen in recent years is the superintendent's plan is what the school committee adopts. And I'm not looking to, insert myself into their process. I'm just saying, I need a plan that indicates what's being contemplated in order to make the difficult decisions on all sides. Because, it's one revenue source and it's one, budget. So, okay. The next article is dog license fees. Again, it's been several years since license fees went up, so I'm proposing to raise them by $5 for the license fees, $15 for the domestic and training kennels, and then more, for personal kennels, you can see $15, and then more for that for the commercial kennels. So that's what's taking place here to cover the real cost of not only the licensing, but the oversight, the inspections, and so forth that goes with the veterinary kennels, commercial kennels, and so forth. Again, it's been some time since those fees were adjusted. Under seal of weights and measures, the same thing. Now that we're no longer with NIMCOG, our assessment was $19,000 under NIMCOG. It's no longer it's probably going to be closer to $30,000 for our proportionate share to hire an employee, benefits, vehicle, equipment, the ongoing training and so forth in a 3-town consortium, which we consulted with the state as well as the NIMCOG, who was providing this program. Part of the reason they get out from under it wasn't tenable. They weren't fulfilling the full requirements of the position. So I've got to adjust the fees accordingly. Article 25 is the community preservation, annual appropriation for debt service and administrative expenses and reserves, and the town accountant and us will pull those numbers together in the weeks ahead. Article 26 is a community preservation article. This is basically seeking a $2 million appropriation to suppress the utilities and remove the utility poles through the central square. And if you see the photo, that's what we're trying to get rid of, what you see there in terms of the poles and the utility lines. And the challenge on this thing has been the traditional funding source, which was the source that did the town common, was a surcharge from the utilities. And in Verizon's case, it was from the landlines. Well, the problem is the landlines isn't a viable source of revenue anymore, and Verizon is not moving to take on the project without a more viable funding source. And so working with new town council and doing research, that we found that the community preservation funds have been utilized in other communities for three similar projects. And so that's what we'll do, is we will seek the $2 million to apply it to the project, mostly the Verizon costs. National Grid has no problem with the surcharge. There's $3 million over that in the account to fund their portion. And this will enable that to remove this, basically for where it ends up by the common, right through the heart of Central Square. It's just, I know it's a huge amount of money, a huge project, but it's well supported in the community. It's the vision that's been in place for this community now for 35 years when this has started, and we're now trying to execute the next phase of the project.
Will this include, because there's obviously trenching that's got to be done.
Yes.
Will this include resurfacing, or does it not include? It
Yeah,
does.
basically it'll do their base resurfacing.
Okay.
The big challenge in that is, as people may recall, there's a brook that runs right across that, which doesn't help the cost as well. So basically, that's where this will come. And my guess is, with all the engineering, you're probably seeing this project constructed probably spring of 27, maybe 20. It's going to take a while. Maybe before then, but time you get Verizon, National Grid, they can agree to a set of plans. They don't prioritize these type of projects because it
No,
doesn't
they
do
do
anything
not.
for them. Doesn't bring them revenue. Doesn't do anything.
This goes just to the common, it doesn't come down here.
It goes from the common, where the common is already cleared,
Yeah,
down through Central Square, basically to the library.
okay, just straight down.
Yeah,
So
that's-
it doesn't come this way.
No,
Yeah.
there are future phases in the original vision that went down slightly onto Billerica Road and then down Chelmsford Street.
Yeah.
That would have to be a future phase. Those phases aren't as expensive, but the real intent of the project was the heart of the center, and that's why we're moving there next.
I think it'll look great,
Yeah.
really great.
I never noticed the lights until I had a cousin from Italy came, and she's like, "Why do you guys have straight, like these
Wires,
strings,
poles.
these wires
Yeah,
everywhere?"
they're
And I
terrible.
never, like, oh, right, they are kind of ugly. Like, I never noticed
very
that.
ugly.
That's so true. So how does that work, like, in terms of National Grid just tacking on fees, and then we had an agreement with National Grid, and over time?
Yeah, it's under
there's a
state law. We don't,
pool of money.
Yeah, this was done decades ago, literally decades ago.
Okay.
They have, it's in the statute that they basically put a surcharge on your electric bill, and right now there is no surcharge because they're sitting on $3.4 million.
On our behalf, or?
Yeah, on our behalf, only to Chelmsford electricity takers.
Are there other pots of money out there that just are kind of
No.
out there? You have to
No.
know that they're there?
No,
Okay.
no. That's why you don't see these projects very often, and certainly not to the scale of what Chelmsford envisioned, but I think we can at least get the heart of what we want to do.
So is it because we're
Yeah.
spending money
And-
that
and-
we're getting them to kind of
Do the work.
do
Yeah,
the
they'll
work,
do
but they're sitting on our money?
Right, and then the interesting thing is, whether we use community preservation or a surcharge, it would be generally the same people paying. The beauty is, these people are already paying it in the surcharge, and we have funding in the community preservation, so it actually they might be a little bit better off than if we said, oh, we can't do it on cell phones, but if you rely on the surcharge, you can't benefit from it, and if you're a low taxpayer, you can still write it off on your taxes. So I think the surcharge approach is actually more beneficial.
Yeah.
And again, it won't increase the levy because that's fixed, so we're not increasing the surcharge. Article 27 is the citizen petition article that was postponed from the fall, and we did reach out to the petitioner, and she does want to come in to the Springtown meeting. So I guess you can reach out to her again, Jim, and schedule her.
I will do that.
All right. Article 28 is a zoning article that's sponsored by the town manager. And this has to do would allow for fast casual restaurants in the Route 129 overlay. You can see we'd have to amend the use regulations to delete the word upscale and insert the word fast. So instead of upscale, fast casual would be fast casual. And We would allow 2 on one property, which would fill our quota, we believe, of the 3 that are allowed in the, under the current zoning. And it would also allow them to be freestanding, not located as an end cap like you see at Press Cafe. And we would reduce the size, so they actually be smaller freestanding buildings that instead of 35,000 minimum, 2,000, and instead of a 50-seat minimum, 30. And we wouldn't require they provide dinnerware. And we would also remove this, in the bylaw, the restriction of hours. That wouldn't prohibit the planning board from, if a permit came through, of imposing hour restrictions. So I think the best thing to do is visualize. If you see the next slide, I just want to put it into context. If you look to the top center, that's Press Cafe, that white roof, the triangle. You know, there's Route 3, there's the Cloverleaf interchange. The building property that spurned this is on Mill Road, the old Lighthouse School, which is that parcel right there that's encapsulated by the off-ramp in Mill Road and Barica Road. So basically, it's certainly a clear commercial property that abuts the off-ramp on one piece, abuts Billrica Road, and abuts Mill Road. That's what sort of moved this forward. Because by the bylaw, you can only have it on that portion of Mill Road or Billrica Road. And we've now been years into the bylaw and have not seen any other interest in amenities. Why this works and why it comes from them is they're trying to fill the property with Lighthouse School vacating. And like anyone else in the office market, they're not finding tenancy. They're also not finding anyone who wants to put a school in there. And really the value of that parcel is its proximity to the highway, the interchange. And so the idea is there's already a traffic signal. 90+%, probably 95% of the traffic would come from Billrica Road and the highway onto Mill Road, use it and turn around and go back out. So that's what's being contemplated. It would provide amenities, which was part of what the overlay was designed to do, was to provide overlays. The cost, what they've told us, again, it's not spot zoning, we're zoning the whole area, but what they've told us in this property owner is the cost to demo their building and then build the freestanding requires a grade A tenant lease to justify that investment for financing and operations. So you're not going to do that with a little plaza like they tried to do across the street and never found a tenant, and so forth. And so basically, what you call a grade A tenant in today's world are your Starbucks, your McDonald's, those type of people who have the track record and the market power to do this type of tenancy for the project. And I think if you go 2 slides in terms of what might it look like, that's Freeport, Maine. That's a McDonald's in Freeport, Maine that has a drive-through. They took a colonial building and made it a McDonald's. You can see in the window, if you look real close, that's the little golden arches. That exists up in Freeport, Maine, and with a drive-through. They took obviously an historic colonial building. Now, that's not what we're going to get in Chelmsford. But the point is I think you can, as you can see by our CVS in Chelmsford, you can work with the permitting and the permitting of that to get a building that I think is aesthetically fits the community in design, in appearance. So that's why I think this is worth consideration of town meeting. You know, I know it's different than what was originally envisioned in terms of upscale retail, but I think the people in the community, I think in general, and I think the people in the business district would welcome a Starbucks, would welcome another dining option. And yes, it may not have tableware at McDonald's, but yet if I drive by Press Cafe, I can't tell you what tableware they're using in the building. And I just think that this is worthy of consideration because I think the market has kind of told us where we're at. And this, I think, should be considered by the town. So that's where we are on this, under this article. Article 29 and 30 are zoning and general bylaw amendments pertaining to outdoor lighting. Kelly Beatty was in this room with the planning board last night, in the room virtually, I guess, finalizing that lighting bylaw, and that will take some discussion at town meeting because and I haven't inserted it because it is quite lengthy, and
Great idea.
I'm waiting for the final revisions, which should be in the next
Okay.
day or two. And then finally, that brings us to Article 32, which is, I'm sorry, 31, which is technical corrections. What this is for the MBTA zoning is the Attorney General approved the bylaw the town adopted. But in their approval, they said, you might want to go back and modify some of your definitions to make them fully improve with today's standards. Meaning you remove or add language and remove language that talks about need for school facilities or adequacy, excluding school systems and excluding the school systems under special permit language and so forth. And then the definition of family, they kind of suggested we change that to the current language you see cross through any number of individuals related by blood, marriage, adoption, foster, or legal guardianship living together in one dwelling unit as a single housekeeping unit, but not including more than 4 persons living together unrelated by blood or marriage. Now, you might want to add something like 1 or more persons occupying a dwelling unit and living as a single nonprofit housekeeping unit. So again, this is technical corrections, they're not substantive, but they just thought that this is better preferred language.
I think that's just
for our bylaw.
streamlining sentence, and it basically says the same thing.
Yeah, it basically does, but it's their preference.
No-brainer.
Article 32 is the floodplain zoning district. Again, this is done every 10 years when the federal government updates the floodplain map, so we, again, changing the maps as well as some of the nuances of the federal definitions. It is lengthy, and so I haven't been able to fit it in all these individual slides, but you will see it eventually. Article 33 is a latecomer. We're installing electric vehicle charging stations over at town offices, Adams Library, the Senior Center, Roberts Field, West Fire Station, Vinyl Square. And our current town council believes that town meetings should vote to approve the easements for the electrical infrastructure from National Grid that goes into these locations. So we're going to do it. There's no harm in it. And then Article 34, the final article, is a street acceptance for Woodbine Street extension. Again, the town is doing some drainage and other work out there, and again, we're trying to correct our maps. What you can see there, the top right there is Market Basket on that map. So that's Woodbine Street that runs parallel behind Market Basket. So that's what we're doing. So again, that'll be a consent agenda item. I know engineering's been working with council on this. Again, we want to have as much road that we have as public way approved because that affects your Chapter 90 funding. And that's your warrant, so it's probably three sessions if I'm guessing.
We're lucky.
If we're lucky.
Could go to
Thank
4.
Thank you.
It's the zoning articles that get you every time.
My God.
They certainly do.
Yep.
Okay. So, moving along in our agenda this evening, which I've just lost. We have a reorganization discussion and vote. Now, we are missing one member this evening. We can proceed pursuant to the agenda, or if anyone wants to defer, we can certainly do that as well.
It would be probably better if we had the full board, but I think we have most people here, and I would doubt that there would be much objection if we would ask the current chair to serve another term. Are you willing to do that?
What's another year?
Well, that's the way I see it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it's basically running the slides and writing the letters.
it's a lot more than that. Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
So if there's no objection to that from the rest of the board, I would nominate that Jim Clancy be chair for the upcoming year.
I second it.
Any other nominations?
I move that nominations be closed.
I second it.
Vote?
All in
Closing.
favor?
Aye.
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 So, do you have to take a vote on the actual nomination? There's only one left, so I guess I can't make the motion. to nominate.
Okay, so I would certainly, also in similar vein, I would suggest that we continue and ask the current vice chair if she would be willing to serve for another year.
We have to vote on the
Oh, I'm
actual-
sorry. So we have to take a vote on the,
Yep, so, all in favor?
yep, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
Abstain.
okay. I would also ask
The floor for, yeah.
I would also ask the current vice chair if she'd be willing to serve for another year.
Sure.
Of course you would. All right,
Jim does all the work anyway, so.
there you go.
One of these days, I'm not going to show up to a meeting.
That's fine.
Be prepared. Just to test it.
Yeah.
See what happens. So we have a nomination on the table. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right, seeing none, the motion to close.
Motion to
nominations?
close nominations.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and a motion on the actual appointment?
Those in favor for Anita Tanini as vice chair? Aye.
I'll abstain.
Okay, all right, takes care of that. Moving right along the agenda, review and discussion liaison assignments for fiscal year '26 budget reviews. Let me pull up the liaison assignments from last year. I do have the list. Okay.
I didn't see, well, you're looking
Okay.
that way.
Yeah.
I'm out.
So capital planning kind of stays there, it's done.
Can you make it a little bigger?
Can I get a little bigger?
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Thank you.
All
Big
right.
enough? Want to keep going, or
That's good.
I can keep going?
Hey, just-
Perfect.
All right. Okay, so, last year, Anita, you had Board of Health.
Sure.
You want to keep that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And anyone wants, especially Steve, if you want to jump in on one, more than one person's perfectly fine for a lot of these. I'm not saying you have to take over Kathy's. That's an option.
It would help, though.
We got a lane too, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess what makes most sense here, right? So my personal interests, are aligned with my family at this point, which really are schools, libraries, and broadly in finance across the town, right? I've got some history too, with a bit of the DPW in terms of like cemetery side, but not much beyond that.
Okay.
In terms of things that would be helpful to
Well, okay.
experience.
So let's, as we go through, we'll add you in. The cemetery, Dave. The running joke is that you've been the best person for that one.
I have to protect my future home.
That's funny.
Anyone else want to join, Mr. Goslin, or we can keep it at
You
one?
can handle it.
It's a quick, Dave's awesome.
You can handle it.
Yo, Dave Boyle is
Probably
absolutely
not much
awesome.
going on there.
Fair enough. Okay. Chelmsford Public Schools. This is where we lost Kathy.
Yeah, happy to jump in there.
Good.
Okay.
OVA.
Yeah, no, I got it right here.
You want to keep
I didn't want to do it wrong.
It's all a hard one. I get it.
Once I got in there once, we're all set. And then Dave, you want to stay on? Sam, you want to stay on
Sure.
as well?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Community Preservation Fund has been Kathy traditionally.
I can do that.
Okay.
We can give Elaine all the hard ones, right? She's not here.
Exactly. That's how that
Yeah.
works.
She tried to, in
Oh.
her defense, she tried to be, but we had the issues with the
She did
Zoom.
try.
So
Okay.
I've gotten all new set of links and hope, so next time around, knock on wood, we should be all set going forward.
Good.
We don't have her phone number, do we? Like to text her, see if there's anything she wants?
No, let's not do
Because
that.
she's watching.
I know she is. And this is on the final list, we can add people on too.
Okay.
So Elaine, if you're watching, you can let us know what you'd like to be added to, so don't feel like this is the final round, if you will. Once again, have you been on the senior center? Do you like to continue that one? I feel like there's a trend here.
For some reason, it seems to fit.
Fair enough. All right. Last year, for DPW, waste, sewer, storm, and public facilities, we had Cindy and Sam. I think, Steve, you said you'd be interested in joining that group?
Yeah, but again, it's sort of, I think continuity matters, right? So
Sure.
the relationships and everything else. So, you know, if you can, you want to slot me in
Sure.
areas where
It
makes
covers a lot of
sense,
stuff, so yeah, that's fine.
Sure.
Finance Department accounting, Anita, you've done that with Cindy in the past.
I like to stay on just because
Sure.
kind of have our
You have your
rhythm.
thing.
We
Continuity
and
matters,
John have
yeah.
our
Yeah.
thing kind of
Yeah.
quickly go
Yeah.
through them.
Okay.
Yeah.
That works with John.
Sure.
He may not want that, but.
So we'll keep that for the accounting, assessors, information technology, and treasury collecting. Fire department, I have been on recently. And wants to join, that's fine. Completely up to the group.
How intense is that? Is it
It's
helpful?
not. It's not intense. No.
Yeah, I'll join you.
Sure. And then library, it was Kathy and Cindy.
I'll stay.
Okay, I might throw Elaine on there.
There you go.
Right.
But again, Elaine, you can change if you'd like. Neshoba Valley, last year was Dave, Sam, and Cindy. Happy to continue doing that.
Yeah, I can,
Sure.
sure.
Yep.
Okay. PEG access, Sam, traditionally that's been
Yep.
you. Okay. Police department, I have done. Again, anyone wants to join, that's fine, don't have to. We talked to Elaine, Elaine wants to see what she wants to do. Town manager, we just saw the budget this evening. And then last year, you did veteran services, Sam.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. And again, Elaine, just let us know, and we'll add you in where you'd like to be. Okay. For warrant articles, let's take a look at the warrant articles again. We just ran through them, see which ones we'd like to have come in. If we need to have a contact with them, we usually don't have a separate contact that goes out and liaise with them, but we schedule them for different nights. I know we're going to have the cemetery, the pet cemetery come back in. I'll reach out, likely with a few of the articles. I don't know, as far as the zoning articles are concerned, whether it would, because I know they were presented by you for a couple of them, Paul. I don't know if we want the planning board to come in, or.
Yeah, I'm just presenting the one.
Okay,
Yeah,
oh,
the planning board will do we're doing the flood?
Floodplain, the outdoor lighting, I don't know who's.
No, that's.
That'll be
that's-
Kelly
that's
Beatty,
Kelly,
right?
Yeah, I
So
think we're just
we'll-
doing the floodplain, right?
I think so.
And the,
MBTA zoning.
oh, that's right, yeah, so, so Chris will
Yeah.
come in for the MBTA zoning and the floodplain. He's
Okay,
doing those.
we'll reach out to Chris for that one. And then, I think that covers most of them. There aren't a whole lot, there weren't very many articles that were, we only had the one, really the one citizen petition. I guess you can count Kelly's as one. But really, Mary Donovan's is the one I can think of off the top of my head.
I mean, the planning board's gonna hold hearings at the end of this month on all the zoning articles.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll probably want to schedule them after that,
After
yeah.
that,
yeah, in March.
Have them- And then have them, I mean, even under my article, I think you should hear from the planning.
Oh, I do too, yeah.
Have them come in at the same time, would be fine.
Certainly.
Make it all, you know.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I'll add those in. I'll circulate this after this meeting, so everybody has a copy. Okay. Discuss budget hearing and Springtown meeting warrant article schedule. So Pam, thank you very much for sending us the schedule for this year. Budget hearings started this evening. We won't hold one next week because the possibility of getting people out and meeting is possible, but with it being a shortened weekend with the holiday and being school vacation week, typically we don't have a meeting next week. So the following week would be our first opportunity really for holding a meeting. That'd be the 27th of February. So we have one scheduled for that night. So over the next 2 weeks, if people do meet with their liaison assignments, let me know. We can get them scheduled, put them into the schedule. Ask them which night works best for them. Typically is the way we do it. And so we make sure we accommodate people and accommodate times and stuff like that. We won't hold one the first week in March, and the reason we never hold one the first week in the Thursday of the month is because of the conflict with the appeal board. They meet the first Thursday of every month. But then we'll have, following that, the 13th of March, the 20th of March, the 27th of March really should be where we're looking to vote. If we have to hold one after, we could technically, because we have the ability to go to the 10th. Again, skipping that first Thursday, the 3rd. I'd really like to try to avoid that if we can. So it allows us time to vote and then get all the articles together, especially if there are any dissenting votes or not, or votes that are split where we discuss why we voted the way we voted, just to give us enough time to get everything together and get the book out. So that last date would be our April 10th, but really we should target the 27th for being our night that we plan on voting. Pam will start putting them together starting the 20th, and that final day would be the 11th, with the Finance Committee providing, with Pam providing the book at that time. Final chair letter would have to be by the 17th, but if we vote on the 27th, we should be able to do it way before then, so we can get the book finalized and get that off for the printer and for the town website. And if the earlier we do it, really the better. And that way we can get it online. I know the warrant, the charter provides that we only have to have it the week before, but if we can have it before then, in time for the strategy session, the Wednesday before town meeting. And that will be held at the senior center. Yeah. And televised or just recorded? Recorded for viewing. Yeah. It's hard to get a live view on that one, but I know there are lots. Just looking at the people signing up for town meeting representatives, there are a lot of new faces that have pulled, which is great. But that information session is really important, and it really goes through and walks through a lot of the articles, and I think it helps reduce the time spent going through things at town meeting, because people have a better understanding and have the questions answered that week before. So having our information to them prior to that is duly helpful. And then town meeting will begin on the 28th. So get ready for your 3 nights.
I'm
I
betting
haven't done 3 nights in a long time.
It's been a while.
Oh.
Yeah. We were due for one.
Yeah, we are.
Right. All right. That concludes the hearing schedule. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any public comment? We have one member in the public, but he's not going to comment.
Smart man.
All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. See everybody in a couple weeks.